Hey guys, thanks for tuning into this episode of the Game of Gymnastics podcast. This week I'm joined by Leo Westbrook, self-proclaimed biggest fan of DMT, an athlete who has competed at an international and national levels, who has transitioned to coaching the sport. We'll talk about what DMT is, his experiences as an athlete and coach, and what he wants for the sport in the future. I hope you enjoy. So you've been involved in DMT for nearly 20 years. How did you first get into the sport?
So it was pretty much always done gymnastics. I started in a two-piece artistic as a kid, basically, because my parents put me in because I trip over my own 2 feet any given opportunity. So I started with that, but my sister was doing she has autism, and she was doing the disability trampoline sessions. So I used to go along after that and really enjoyed that as well. And our trampoline club happened to also have a really big presence in the DMT space in the UK. So once I was 11 or 12, I think I'd just fully switched over to trampoline and DMT, and particularly DMT. And yeah, took it from there.
So what's kept you in it for so long? What about DMT specifically has kept you in it for so long?
I think it was just, it's so exciting to watch. I was really lucky we had some really top guys who were competing when I first started. People like David Rimmer, he competed Britain's first triple on the DMT. So for a boy who was 11 or 12 and, to be honest, not massively talented, it gave me something to look up to straight away. But at the same time, it was quite accessible. Like, I only had to do 2 skills at a time. It wasn't too stressful because it's quick passes similar to the vault. And I think, very transferable skills from the trampoline and from gymnastics as well. So it was just, I guess a good mixture of things that created this.
So, I mean, you were still competing as recently as 2019? Was it any more recently?
So I think I was competing properly up until about 2022. I think I made sure to do 1 proper season after COVID and all that. But I've actually just spur of the moment entered another competition. We have the National League has a qualifier up in Newcastle in the end of March. So I figured, summer doorstep, I'm going to be coaching anyway. So should be interesting to see how much I've declined since then.
Fair enough. So you've not officially retired now. You're still in it.
I almost purposely made sure to never officially retire. I think I always wanted to be someone who can still do some things. And I grew up watching. So one of my coaches, Pete Reg, was competing on a trampoline until he was in his 50s. So it's something that never seemed a limiter to me. Like, yes, there'll be ebbs and flows with life, but I don't think I'll ever be someone who properly retires. I'll be sticking around like a bad smell.
Nice. So what were some of the highlights as a gymnast for you?
So when I was younger, I was lucky enough to be selected onto the junior England team. So I was able to compete in Home Nations Championships. I was able to compete in Belgium and Sweden, which was really, really cool. And again, it was just another thing that I was probably snuck onto the team there, but it opened my eyes to the possibilities of what this all could be. Unfortunately, to be my only international selections, I made it onto the squad as a senior, but couldn't make it to any of the competitions. But my other highlights were probably I became the National League champion in 2016, I believe that was. And I also became the senior British silver medalist I think that was just after lockdown. I think that must have been 2021 or 2022. That pretty much sums up my career, a series of almost, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that is how it is for a lot of people, to be fair.
Yeah,
it's near misses. So having competed and now coached, how's your perspective on DMT changed over the years?
It's a good question. I think it's still the sport that captures my attention the most. And again, I think just moving up to a new city in Newcastle, I grew up in Merseyside, and helping my friends set up a club and watching kids go from, we've had some kids practically doing tuck jump, straddle jump all the way up to, we've got RJ who's competing at senior world championships now. I think it's different challenges, but also different rewards as well. And I think as I've grown, I've really enjoyed the rewards of seeing these athletes set their targets and help them work towards that, which particularly as an athlete, I had to, towards the end of my career, I was putting DMT a bit on the back tie because I was having to finish uni, I was having to work and things. So it's been quite good being able to put other people's targets first. It's almost renewed that fire for me.
Nice. So what was that transition to coach like for you?
It was fairly natural. I think a lot of gymnasts have probably been put through the level 1, level 2 almost as soon as they turn 16, 17, just because their club needs more coaches. And it was just something I enjoyed straight away. When I during Newcastle University, it was something I really wanted to do, start my coaching qualifications. And then my best friend James happened upon an opportunity to essentially start his own trampoline club at one of the local leisure centres. I jumped on board with him.
So a bit onto DMT specifically. Can you describe DMT for someone who just doesn't know anything about it?
Yeah, so essentially, I think most people have seen a vault. We essentially have a 20, 25 meter run up. We're just running as fast as we can, generating enough power as we can to launch ourselves at this trampette. We're going to do 2 skills on this trampette, typically a forward skill and a backward skill. But there are variations on that. At the top level, they're doing 3 or 4 somersaults in every single skill. And they've got essentially an archery target to try and land it at the end. So we've got a red zone, a yellow zone, and a blue zone. And we want to land right in that red, no steps, and that's hopefully a perfect score.
With vaults, and you mentioned like a vault run up there. For us, we don't particularly always sprint full speed down that runway, specifically because we just go the speed that is necessary to do that vault. Like things like Kazumatsu's, you often see people running a lot slower. Like if you've seen Jake Jarman do a vault, he jogs because he doesn't need loads of power, because he needs to just generate enough to go high enough to get the twists and stuff around. Is it similar in DMT, or is it just balls to
There
wall,
is similar. I think that's probably my coaching coming in, where especially with younger kids, we're trying to get them to just learn to run as fast as they can. But in reality, as you say, we're probably running more like between 70 and 90%, depending on the skills we're doing. Especially, I was guilty of this when I had a bit of competition, that as if I'm running too fast, you're probably likely to keep your skills going forwards instead of shooting up as well. So there is a bit of that, and try to get the hurdle step right. But in general, you still... I think we're lucky in DMT that if we notice we've got a bit too much power, we'll probably just come out of our tub shape a little bit earlier, or pike shape a little bit earlier, and that can actually contribute more to our execution marks as well. So I think in general, more power on that run up is good. I'm sure some coaches will debate that, but yeah.
So you mentioned takeoffs there, or like changing horizontal to vertical sort of momentum. Obviously, you've got 2 very different takeoffs in DMT. You've got one where you're just going from the run to the first jump, and then the first jump to the second jump. How do you train that?
It comes down to a lot of practice, and I think especially if you're starting as a junior and becoming a senior, that takeoff probably is going to take over time. But I think we have different drills we can do, like we can pile up mats onto the spotter of the DMT and just practice doing our simpler skills, trying to generate height, or even practicing just your mount skill to get it right for competition. But I think it essentially comes down to practice, trying to get your hurdle step right, trying to lift up really high into it. Always one cue we use for some of our gymnasts is to, instead of trying to jump up, we always try and get them to think about pointing backwards as they take off, because then as you're hitting the angle of the DMT, you're probably going to you're probably going to come up more vertical anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like with a lot of these different disciplines, there's very different surfaces that you're sort of taking off on, I suppose, because like even within mag, you've got the harder floor, you've got things like springboards, and then tumbling is softer than the floor, but is harder than like fast track, and fast tracks. Yeah, there's a progression to it. So, but like all of these takeoffs are sort of similar in concept, because things like when we were learning like round off, straight back, like round off, flick, tuck back, straight back, whatever it is, always think about like body facing that way. So you're jumping forwards, not jumping backwards, because you're going to move backwards anyway. So it's a similar sort of...
exactly that sort of concept, yeah.
So what do you think makes or like separates a good DMT athlete from a grade 1?
That's a good question. I think undeniably, I think this is probably true across gymnastics. I think you just need to have that self-confidence there, not even the awareness. I've seen some athletes who are brilliant don't back themselves on skills, and I'm sure you know, as soon as you start doubting yourself to land the pass, you're probably not going to land it. You might not even go for it. So I think a lot of it comes down to confidence. And I think if you take that a step further, it probably comes down to early in their career, getting all the foundations right, getting all the basic drills, drilling this body awareness, spatial awareness, and just making sure all of this is perfect as a youngster, because then that translates into these are all just jigsaw pieces that you can put together to create these massive skills. And if when you get to that point as a senior, it probably doesn't seem like that big a step, as incredible as that may seem.
So do you think those sorts of basics also contribute heavily to like the execution of the skills, like in the long run?
Oh, I think so, 100%. I think it's even comes down to, I think, DMT does tend to inherit a lot of athletes from different sports like diving and gymnastics. And I think you can quite often, not necessarily in a bad way, but you can tell which sports they come from. And I think that also adds to the pretty cool dynamic that we've got this variety of athletes. But I think a lot of the execution marks tend to come from the technique, from the coaching technique points that were developed way back in the day anyway. So we started really prioritizing line outer skills because they do help with twists and they do help with controlling the landings and for the net skills. So I definitely think that comes into it.
How important is the execution of the skills when compared to just pure chuck in biggest skills possible?
So it's a balancing act and it's changed through the years. Arguably, it's gotten slightly less important as we go on. In the code of points, I believe, for every pass, we have a difficulty mark, which for the top men, that's going to be a minimum of 9.6 going on to, I think the current world record is 13.1. So that on its own is already more than a single execution score. We have our execution scores. We have 4 execution judges, but only 2 of those all count towards your actual score, the middle 2. So when you're comparing that to the difficulty, they're actually pretty level pegging. You then include as part of that, a big part of the execution is we only get 2 deductions for the skills, and then the 3rd deduction comes for our landing. So when you're landing, your stick becomes just as important as the execution for either one of your 2 skills. It's not to say it's not important at all to have the execution, but it definitely doesn't have to be the be all and end all. I think a lot of people, you can play to your strengths, but if you're not improving your difficulty, you're always going to be limited. I think that you might have seen online on Instagram, there's so much, I think we call it like skill inflation at the moment as well. We're just going through such a meteoric rise in the athletes who are doing all these massive difficulty skills as well. We've got athletes doing triple somersaults with like 2 or 3 full twists in. We've got multiple athletes who are doing quadruple somersaults now. On the women's side, we've got at least 3 or 4 women who are like regularly competing this season already. Triple somersaults, trying to land millers, which are double back somersaults with 3 full twists, or full in Rudies with so that'd be a double front with 2.5 twists. So the skill inflation at the moment is incredible, and I think that's playing a really massive part in the scoring at the moment as well. It's really exciting time to be a DMT fan.
Fair enough. Yeah, and how was that score actually like comprised? So you mentioned there was the difficulty, obviously, then there's the execution in each of the skills and the landing. Like how does that actually come together?
So your execution for the pass, it's probably, let's say, an average score of 9.3 per judge. So that'd come to 18.6. Let's say that athlete was doing a triple, which had come to 9.6. I'm giving myself really awful numbers. 18.6. So that'd be a 28.2. So that'd be, in the men's field, that'd be a pretty much almost a minimum score you'd have to get in a world championships nowadays per pass. That's without any penalties as well. So that's if they're landing in the yellow zone, that'll be already taking it down 0.6 as well, I think.
All right. Yeah, just as a bit of a baseline, I think that helps. So how do you approach sort of like skill progression? So going from double to triple somersaults, even to quad, how does that work?
I think it probably goes by the athlete and what their different strengths are. Like I'm sure you see in gymnastics, like Jake Johnman is a massive twister, as he might not be prioritizing triple somersaults as much. We have that a bit in a DMT as well, but it essentially comes down to getting the confidence in the prior skills. We have different progressions. We use different equipment. So we quite often use the trampolines to work on our skills. We might often go to foam pits or use a rig to first learn the skills and develop them, get them fixed in our mind, get them safe before we transfer them onto the DMT. Some facilities even have a DMT going into the pit, which is an absolute godsend for if you are wanting to try some of these massive skills. And then, it's just gradually progressing that onto harder landings, I suppose, until you're in the full competition setup.
So, I mean, obviously we've talked a lot about DMT already, but is there anything you'd want to clear up about DMT that you think the audience might not know or might already think that is wrong?
Good question. I think a lot of people think, particularly because we share competitions with trampolining, which has its Olympic spotlight, and with tumbling, I think we quite often there used to be the common joke that DMT stands for didn't make trampoline. And maybe there was a bit of a case of that 20 years ago when there wasn't as much presence of DMT. So a lot of the athletes, not to say they weren't great, but they were picking from a small pool and might not have had the full talent pool to pick from. I don't think you can say that nowadays. I think since I started, the number of clubs who have adopted DMT, really taken it, it's probably like tripled or quadrupled since I've started. With that, you get, for one, the bigger talent pool of athletes, you get the coaches coming in, and I think it's just really helped the development of DMT. I'd argue that DMT is, at least in Britain, is probably where the most exciting development is happening at the moment, between all these clubs coming in, all these athletes coming in. And again, you can't even say it's because they didn't make trampoline. Some of these guys compete on trampoline as well. Dan Berry, Jolly Paradise, they both compete at a senior British level, just to name two. So they're coming in with these techniques comparable to trampoline and still owning it on the DMT.
Yeah. So what would you say, obviously this is a very subjective question, but what would you say is the hardest part of DMT?
Always found it hard. I think, to be honest, probably even up until the last couple of years of my career, I think just comparing to everyone else as well. I think when you're watching all these really cool passes come up and you want to get them straight away because you want to be competing at that level and doing these really cool skills. But I think quite often you've got to make sure, like, it's great to be ambitious and see these skills for inspiration. But at that time, particularly if you've got competitions coming up, you've got to look at what you can do. So when I was competing, I started trying not to watch anyone I compete against, at least like during the competition. It's one of the bits I've enjoyed most instead of not being competing as much as actually watching the guys I compete against because they are awesome. But I think it's just taking where you are and then instead of trying to go straight for these skills or straight for these passes, trying to identify the stepping stones that you can do to work towards these passes. I remember Reece Gray, just before he retired, he put up an Instagram post about how he planned his passes for World Championships. He had, I think it was 16 weeks. He looked at where he was starting and he looked at the scores he wanted to get. And he managed to work that into a week by week progression, which I wasn't as much into the coaching at that time. So to me, that was a really cool way to see things.
Good. On like more the mental side, obviously DMT is really quick. There's only two jumps in it. How do athletes like sort of manage that pressure?
I think you have a lot of different techniques for that. You've got some athletes who like to plug themselves into the music and just like kind of cut off the world around them so they can visualize the passes. You've got some athletes who like to keep themselves calm. I know I had a teammate who used to bring his Game Boy down, which probably showed my age, but he used to bring his Game Boy down and play a bit of Pokemon to almost distract himself from the pressure of the situation. I think it can even differ between training and the competitions. In training, when you're trying to land these passes for the first time, that's also nerve-wracking as well. But I personally find at least you want to ramp yourself up in that time to give yourself that bit more adrenaline. So I used to really rely on my teammates to help me on at that point. Whereas in competition, I'd then rather be chatting to them about anything except what's going on right now.
Is there any time sort of when you're in the pass to sort of correct any mistakes that you like? Do you feel it? Like when you're doing the somersaults, do you feel if you're slightly off?
Oh, you definitely do. I think one of the fun things about DMT as well is that like without fail, every competition you're going to see athletes improvising mid-pass because they've realized that maybe they've gone offline or they haven't got quite the height they expected. It's something you have to do many times. And I think, again, that comes with a bit of experience. You start to learn when you need to do that. You sometimes even get athletes who decide to upgrade mid-pass as well. And I think, which is incredible. But I think, again, that comes down to if you're training properly, not just training only the passes you want to complete, but just training as a whole, making sure you've still got a wide library of skills to pick from. I think you can really improve your spatial awareness to that point of, this isn't going as I planned. Maybe I should change on this line out instead of twisting 1.5 times to get the Rudy out. I'm just going to do a half twist, get myself a bit steadier and hope I can still make the dismount.
I mean, yeah, downgrading mid-pass is fair enough. And like it takes a lot of skill, takes a lot of practice and everything like that. And you can only sort of do it if you're very confident with the pass. But upgrading, that's insane. Like how?
I've done it once or twice before. I think as your coach comes to learn you, they come to kind of learn what to expect with you when you're competing.
Yeah.
I think at this point I was starting to learn a half in Rudy out, which is a double back somersault. You have a half twist in the first and a 1.5 twist in the second somersault. I was planning to just compete the half in, half out pike, so just a half twist at each somersault. But I realised actually my height's pretty good in this skill. I've got pretty good vision. I know where I am, so I just was able to just use that line out, generate a bit more hip twist, and go for the half and Rudy. Which I think, for me at least, I was never able to do it completely out of the blue. But I think you get some athletes who could probably run halfway through the run up if you just shouted to pass it, and he could probably do it. It's levels to the game, I'd say.
That's true with all the disciplines, I suppose. Do you feel like there's any sort of separation? So, like you mentioned, how DMTs often had a perception of being sort of failed trampolinists. So, do you think there's any sort of separation between the types, or like the event types underneath trampoline gymnastics?
I think there's definitely almost different tribes of people, and I think that'll come naturally. Like, if you're competing with these people and training with these people, you're more likely to get on with them and meet up with them compared to, like, particularly I'd say there's more separation with the tumblers because we are completely separate. Whereas a lot of trampolinists, a lot of DMTers their club tend to be trampoline clubs. So there seems to be more mix there. But I would say, particularly now that DMT is rising in notoriety, they are getting these really awesome skills. I think there's been a lot less of this looking down on us. And I do think that there is this shared respect among the three disciplines now, which has been refreshing. There's probably still a way to go, but it's definitely been refreshing to say the least.
I spoke to Jaden Paddock about this, and obviously a tumbler, and he said like he doesn't really feel like there's a separation in terms of knows everyone quite well and like speaks to them quite regularly. Obviously that's like at the highest level, that's people going to worlds, people going to internationals, like under British gymnastics. But I was sort of curious about sort of the lower levels. Like obviously you'll compete at the same time, so you'll compete at the same time at the British, but do you really see each other outside of that sort of?
So I never quite made it onto those Great Britain squads. So I probably never really had the same amount of time to interact with people like Jaden or people like that. Say Corey Walks on the trampoline side, awesome trampolinist. When I've had those interactions with him, he's always been a really sound guy, but we've just never had too many opportunities to actually talk properly. Yeah, I guess it comes down to having the opportunities to talk to each other and just get to know each other more like that.
Fair enough. Do you think that DMT is getting the recognition it deserves?
I think I definitely don't think it is getting the recognition it deserves, but I do think it's getting a lot more recognition. I think partly due to, well, we got put in touch by the social media page, Mini Trampoline. As divisive as he can be sometimes, he definitely has risen the profile of DMT within the gymnastics world. It's brought in athletes from all over, and it's even just people who enjoy watching the sport. I personally think it'd be great to see DMT on more wider sports channels as well in general, whether even if it was just airing the World Championships or managing to get an Olympic spot, because I'd argue out of our three disciplines, it's possibly the easiest for the layman to understand. Like we're aiming to do two really cool flips, land in the red circle, the red square. If you compare that to diving, a lot of we watch it. We come from aerial sports. We kind of understand it. But even us, at the end of the day, we're looking out for whether the splash is big or not. So I think it'd be really cool to have more channels like these, like DMT World, and manage to get a bit more publicity, because I do think the general public, whenever they watch it, they're always amazed by it. I've shown some of my work colleagues, and I don't think I try to explain what sport I do in words, and it goes right over their heads, but they see some videos and they find it incredible.
Yeah, I think, well, that is seemingly the case with a lot of these sorts of disciplines. Spoken to acrobatic gymnasts and obviously tumbling. And I think if more people were introduced into the sport, there would be a lot more people interested in the sport, because like as soon as people see it, like a good proportion of them would then start to enjoy it and follow it. But I think, do you think some of the other issues would be that it's difficult to follow, there's not enough competitions, etc., etc.?
I think there's definitely a part of that as well. So one thing that I've always argued with domestically is that when I first started, our British Championships, you'd have the elite levels there, but when I went to my first British Championships, I was actually at what was called the C level at that time. So 3 levels below the A guys, the elites. But going to that competition, watching the top level men and women who were doing all these incredible passes, like this was 2009, 2010, and they're still imprinted in my brain. Passes that they look quite out of date now, but like as a 12-year-old lad, I was watching these and they were incredible to see, and that's what drove me for the next like 6-7 years on their own was watching these guys. I felt like I was competing alongside them, but also it meant there was a clear pathway to compete with these guys. I think by 2014, 15, we'd separated into probably a bit more relatable to you guys. There was a national development program, which was for your lower levels, which you sounded good on paper. You'd pick a level for the season, you'd compete in it, you'd hopefully make it to a finals at the end of the year against all the other regions. And could potentially become a national champion at that level. But in my head, one, it meant you're stuck at a level for the year. You're not necessarily working on your difficulty progression that much. And also it meant you weren't competing with your high level gymnasts anymore, like you guys at the top level. And it also meant that by this point, I was competing in the A level, the elite level. And it just meant that you didn't have the crowds there. You didn't have as much excitement because, like, at the end of the day, we were still just double mini trampoline, and we were competing in a small arena in Telford. It's not even an arena; it's a convention centre in Telford, where there's barely enough stand space for the parents to sit, let alone all the people who would want to come and watch. That might be where we differ to artistic, where you guys get to compete in the Echo Arena, and it's not cheap, but you can go to pay and watch you guys, and that's awesome. But we didn't even have that. It just felt very cut off and very secretive. And I found even when I was coaching, it was hard to tell our gymnasts that you can get to this level because they weren't even in the same competition stream. There are some competitions that are trying to fix this. We've got some systems. The National League system I mentioned earlier have done an incredible job of, they've had 3 tiers in their competitions since they started. So you've got guys who they wouldn't be able to compete at the British Championships, but they can still go to the National League finals. They still get to experience their championships. And at the same time, they get to watch some of these top athletes like Dan Berridge come along. Like Dan Berridge, who just came off, I think he got a European or World Team medal. And you're then coming along and get to watch him compete at the same competition as you, which is awesome. They're working hard this year to even introduce a regional level below this, where there's a clear pyramid scheme that if you, let's say you compete well at level 6, it means you're promoted to level 5, and then you can promote to level 4 and so on. So I think there's progress being made, but to come back to your original question, I think it is, it's trying to create that visibility is quite hard when the system's set up like that.
Yeah, because, I mean, it's a matter of how do you get more people interested, and getting them to stay is the thing that I think people struggle with, because getting people to watch like a 20-second reel or something, that's not that difficult. But getting people to watch a full 3-4 hour competition, maybe less because you've got to do like 2 jumps, that's it. But like getting people to stay and watch that much and pay to do it and all that sort of thing, like it's a lot more difficult, especially if you've not got a constant stream of something to keep them engaged.
The British Gymnastics probably could, like particularly with DMT, I think we're perfectly primed in that we do 2 passes each, and each pass only really takes about 10 seconds when you're including the run-up and the present at the end. You could very easily take a full competition, cut and edit it, and turn it into a 5-10 minute YouTube video to post, which would hopefully garner a bit of attention.
You would think. Well, it's something to think about, and something to wonder how it could be improved, and how more people could be engaged in the sport. But all we can do is speculate, and it's hard to make any sort of meaningful change without doing something drastic. So, it's food for thought, if nothing else, for now. What is one piece of advice you'd give a young DMT athlete?
It's very cliche, but I think just have fun with it. Like, I think I wanted to train 5 days a week because it was what I loved. It's what I enjoyed. And it was, I think when you're that young, it's so exciting because you're seeing all these like adults around you. Realistically, they're probably 16, but like you're seeing all these senior athletes who are learning these cool skills, and you're starting to learn how to do these. And I think it's just such an awesome time. I think you've just got to enjoy it and use that enjoyment, keep working hard. And I think it can take you places, even if you don't ever make it to the top level. Like, you've still got a load of cool videos to show your mates, haven't you? So,
what's one thing you'd want to achieve in the sport before you finish, like sort of as a coach, as an athlete, whatever?
As an athlete, I did always want to compete that triple pass, and I've always said if I could, it's hard trying to balance it with coaching now, but if I did have the time to train properly, would be the pass I'd always want to compete. I think maybe this is another piece of advice. I never aimed for medals, like particularly once I was past the age of 14, 15. It was more I was spotting passes I wanted to complete or skills I wanted to compete. And I think that's a much healthier way to set those goals because it doesn't depend on anyone else. As a coach, we've been really fortunate in that in terms of performance, we've had RJ who is already competing at the highest level, which is really cool to watch. I think as a coach, it'd be really cool to always take someone from their very first recreation class, manage to take them on that journey all the way through to that level. Jake came to us from a trampoline club and could already do a lot of these skills. And we were really fortunate that he's a great athlete and we got to transfer him to DMT with this library of skills. I think it'd be awesome if we could take a junior athlete or take someone from the first rec session and take them through that journey. I think it's a long journey, but I can't imagine anything cooler than that.
Well, thank you very much. Now that you've been on, now that you've experienced the podcast, who do you think would be a good person to get on next?
I think on the men's side, we've got a lad called Omo, who is just an unstoppable force at the moment. He'd be brilliant. He's only about 19 or 20. He's set to take the world by fire. On the women's side, we've got a lady, Kirsty Way, who is an incredible athlete. She's been at the top of the sport for as long as I've been competing. She's been on British teams for over 10 years, all while balancing study, work. She's doing a PhD at the moment and still doing this. Coach who she worked with for a lot of her career has just moved to Australia to take up a really cool opportunity, and she's still adapting to training without him, but also still competing at this high level, which is awesome.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for listening to the Game of Gymnastics podcast. I've really enjoyed it.
No, thank you for having me on. I hope I wasn't rambling too much for you.
No, you're all good. No, it was definitely interesting to get a different discipline on, learn about a different side of gymnastics that maybe you haven't heard of before, one that's very much gaining a lot of traction in recent years. So thank you very much for coming on. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for listening to the Game of Gymnastics podcast. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.